In Singapore, all able-bodied male citizens have to serve a couple of years of military service. 2 now, 2.5 back in the days of which we are speaking. Now, Singapore is considered to be a rather spooky island. Despite being a highly developed major urban metropolis, it has plenty of dark and creepy corners. Many of these dark and creepy corners are found in the various bases and training areas of the Singapore Armed Forces. Yay. So, back in the year 2000, I was a combat medic with an infantry battalion. While we still had to run around with a rifleman in the mud and the jungle during training, our lives while we were back at base were quite good. This was because the medical centre at our base served as the medical centre which supported the Ministry of Defence itself. Thus, the facilities were quite plush, and while it sucked having to duck out of the way if you looked a bit scruffy and a general or other bigwig was coming in for a checkup, the benefits were that we didn't have to clean the medical centre ourselves, and that we got our air conditioning and TVs in the medical centre waiting area. There's a story about the medical centre itself, but this isn't what I'm sharing today. Now, being a medical centre, we ended up producing quite a bit of medical waste. Contaminated sharps or needles, used dressings, etc. All these went into yellow sharps boxes, and these were supposed to be collected once a week and disposed of by a contractor. With the usual efficiency of the army, there was a screw up with the scheduling and they didn't come in for a month. So far, this wasn't an issue. The sharps boxes were piling up full of bloody needles, but honestly, they didn't take up much space, so we just stacked them discreetly at the back of one of our treatment rooms. Unfortunately, it was around this time that a newly incoming bigwig with too much time on his hands decided that he wanted to conduct a series of inspections of the medical centre. Sharps boxes piling up undisposed of wouldn't reflect well on the staff sergeant in charge of the medics, so he told us to get rid of them. How? We asked. I don't give a damn. Make them go away. Keep them in your bunk. Our bunk was 2 floors above the medical centre, and it was honestly quite awesome for an army barracks. As medics, we weren't under the direct chain of command of the infantry officers, so none of them bothered to come inspect our bunk. As a result, we had it set up to our liking with a TV, stereo and PlayStation in the corner. We used to hold serious crash team racing tournaments. The bunk itself was a large room with windows along one wall, facing outside, and another set of windows and a door on the other side, facing the corridor. We covered the corridor windows over with newspaper so no one could see in. The remaining 2 walls had beds and our cupboards at intervals. Around 12 beds in all, 6 to each wall. The PlayStation, stereo and TV were in one of the corners along the corridor wall. We ended up piling the sharps boxes at the other end of the room, under the outside windows. A number of the melee medics weren't very happy about the situation because, according to their traditions, blood and other bodily waste in a living space invite unclean spirits in. Anyway, there was no choice as our staff sergeant would make our lives miserable if we didn't get rid of the boxes, and we couldn't just dump biohazard waste in the trash. The problems started that night. A number of guys experienced sleep paralysis. Among them were the guys who had protested about the boxes, so I dismissed it as mass hysteria initially. The second night, I woke up to hear music playing. This wasn't unusual, because a lot of the guys would sit up smoking and playing cards until 1 AM or so, most nights. I had little interest in cards, so I'd sit up with them for a while, and go to sleep by midnight after a final smoke. Usually the buggers drifted off to bed without turning the radio off, so more often than not, I'd wake up at 3 AM and go turn it off before going back to bed. There was another bed between me and the radio, but that guy was a very sound sleeper, so the radio never bothered him. So that night, I woke up at 3, with the radio playing softly but irritatingly as usual. I was gathering the energy to sit up and get out of bed when I realised two things. First of all, the room was cold. Not cool, cold. There we were, 1 degree above the equator, in June, in a room cooled only by fans, and it felt cold. Secondly, the radio was changing channels. This wasn't a set with a remote control or anything. It had a solid slider, which you moved to change the frequency. It wasn't just moving up and down through the channels either. It was pausing on certain stations. Not just the English language stations which we all listened to, but oldie stations featuring classic Malay and Chinese songs from the 50s and 60s. Like an old man trying to find a channel he liked. I still figured that it was one of the guys listening to the radio in the dark for some reason, so I sat up and looked over. There was no one in front of the radio. It was dark, but there was some light filtering through from the street lamps outside and from the corridor. I would have been able to see at least a silhouette if anyone had been there. Nothing. Just a frigid room and a radio which was changing channels itself. I noped the hell out, pulled the covers over my head, and went back to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, the sound sleeper in the bed next to mine came up to me. He looked worried and tired. When I asked him about it, he asked, "You heard it too?" He refused to say anything else about it.